like to start.
Okay. So I was thinking just giving it another 30 seconds, 8:05 here, and then we'll get going. We'll be able to really have some good conversations together with a smaller group. So really excited that you all are here. So I'm going to watch the clock.
My first time joining Shui. Claudia, you've gone at least for a year or two, and whenever you say that, I'm like, you're going where? I was thinking how crazy and incredible working virtually is. I was saying to my husband this morning, I'm like, if this were not normal pandemic, like that's in the middle of it, I would be in Anchorage, I think, right now, normally, right?
Hmm.
There. I said, but I get to be at a statewide conference, make a national presentation, and then working with 6 school districts all in 2 days. That would just never happen outside of this kind of reality.
Physically, it couldn't happen. And now,
Okay, okay.
all right, so we'll get started here. Thank you all so much. I just want to say welcome to each of you for being part of um, this time together. We really don't get to explore too much on this topic very often, and so it's really exciting when we get to have these conversations and when we have them with you. So I just want to say welcome to each of you, and I appreciate the time that you're giving us today. So we'll get going here this morning. My name is Claudia Plesa, and I work for the Association of Alaska School Boards. I am lucky enough that I get to work with youth, and I also work with family engagement. So I get to, in some ways, really work on having our programming work for the whole student. And so when we really think about engaging with a student, engaging with that family. And so that's the topic that we'll be talking about today. And so I'm really excited to hear from you and what you have been doing, as well as discussing some resources that we hold here at the association. So Lisa, I'll let you introduce.
Yes. Yake Hutsak. Good morning. Hunye Huhatwasak. Tan Ayafat Tan Yeti. I'll do the super abbreviated introduction. For those of you who know Flinkets, we can take up to 5 minutes introducing ourselves, but it gives you a complete picture of who we are and who we're related to. But I also go by Lisa Worl. I've been working in public education. I'm starting to lose track, but in pieces, probably 18, 20-ish years. Began when my kids were in preschool, and then, helped doing volunteer work with them. We're going weekly to help support their reading, working with the teachers each week, and then serving on site council, eventually serving to the school board, working a bit in the Capitol. On the House Education Committee, and then I got to join these great folks at the Association of Alaska School Board. So doing some family engagement is part of the work that I do, as along with culture responsive education and trauma engaged schools. So good morning, good morning. Good to see you. The hat that I mostly will wear this morning as I talk to you will be that perspective I brought from working in the schools in one capacity or the other. For 14 years as either a parent volunteer, site council, substitute teacher, just like how do we engage with families. So in the room here with us too is Tyler.
Okay, Sukat. My name is Tyler Breen. I am the place-based learning school support coordinator here at ASB. Today I will be your tech guru. If you're having any issues, with breakout rooms or anything like that, you can message me and I'll make sure to get you where you need to go. I've been working in education since 2012 when I was teaching in Paraguay as a Peace Corps volunteer, and since then continued teaching through middle school, high school, and college students in foreign countries. And so really served as everything from their lecturer to immediate medical response. So looking at all of the different things that can happen in the educational context. So I'm glad to be here today, contributing to this conversation.
Thanks so much. And I think one lens that I will also add here is, growing up in an immigrant family, that we're walking into worlds, and that's really what I had that experience of going through education, but walking into worlds. My worlds were separated, and sometimes that can work out for a student. Oftentimes that can cause some issues. And so we really bring this lens as well of really thinking about how do we serve a student and their whole self, um, and really lean on the strengths of their families. My family had lots of strengths, but I don't think that they felt reached out to in the same way. And in my college career, when I did my practicum, I'm Romanian. We did this family engagement study, and there was this woman who had gone through a school district. She'd had 8 kids. They all had gone through the same school district, and she came to one of these meetings that I put on. And so when the principal said, "Why did you come? I've never seen you at things before," and she said, I was actually invited. I was invited in a way that made sense to me. And so I had to come because this was the invitation. And so for us today, it's really about thinking, and you all have done so much work here as well. And you already have so much that you know about your families, but really thinking about how do we create that invitation in the way that is heard by our families and our students. So that's what we'll be talking about today. And you all hold lots of knowledge. So we'll be going into um, just the agreements for our space together. We'll be spending 2 hours together. But we wanted to set the space so that we really get the most out of our conversation. And so these are First Alaskan Institute agreements, as and they have been also adapted with the Southeast traditional values. And so for our time together, speak with care, speak to be understood, and listen to understand. So that is really about trying to bring the most that we can to a conversation. That sometimes means stepping back and listening deeply. And sometimes it means choosing our words very carefully so that they are well understood by others. And sometimes asking questions when we're not sure. So really giving ourselves that time so that we can learn from each other and bring ideas to each other. And
So at the top, you'll notice some of these may look familiar to you if you've joined us before. We often use First Alaskan Institute, that's another acronym, FAI agreements, and you can see them here. But I also here we had paired them with some of the Southeast traditional values because they look like there's some real similarities there. The next of listening well and with respect, valuing our time together, being present and being engaged. This is really about, we know that we're all really busy. We so appreciate that you guys have joined us here today. But this is a good opportunity. You have chosen to be here, and hopefully in these next couple hours, you will have been able to reflect on some of that ways that you're doing the work already, and maybe find a couple of new ways of thinking, some new tools to help you do some family engagement in a real systemic kind of way.
thanks, Lisa. And hold each other up. This is a safe space for meaningful conversation. We are here to make sense of challenges, of things that we don't know the answer to sometimes. And so it's about really creating that space so that we can ask the question or ask the questions that we're afraid to broach sometimes. And so we're all professionals trying to figure this out together. And so really holding each other up. If someone's wondering about something and you've got a solution, or if you are hearing another person here, if you're hearing that somebody's struggling, really trying to invite them into the conversation or check in on them so that we really have this space for us to get to some solutions together.
Challenges to solutions is kind of a good perspective to put on. True in education, as you can imagine, and during pandemic, who we could spend quite a lot of time talking about all the challenges, and I think it's important to acknowledge those challenges. However, at the end of the day, we together here hopefully can come up with some solutions together to help start working, making it a little bit better, be it the practice or making it connecting with those kids in a meaningful sort of way. Um, you've probably been in those conversations sometimes where you kind of get stuck in those challenges, and it can really feel defeating and unproductive. And so we hope not to, we want to acknowledge it and yet work together towards some solutions while we can. Thanks.
And our value of humor helps us. So there's so many parts to our brains. Oftentimes, we can find solutions just by creating the space and being safe, and also really joking and having that humor with us along for the journey. So I just want to encourage us that although we're talking about a serious thing, humor is something that is welcome into the conversation and sometimes can really help us make links that we didn't make before.
Yeah, it's a good release valve at the right time sometimes. The Flexine is a blanket term, but it's that strength in body, mind, and spirit. Um, Kind of similar a little bit if you think about it of taking care of yourself, but also we want you to consider how to take care of others. So in that safe space for meaningful conversations, you know, some of these conversations can be kind of hard, and we hope that you can suspend judgment and really just try to hear people. Um, and try to make it be open to whatever is shared. And hopefully others will extend that same grace to you. Um, some of this conversations with families right now, you think about your own family, you know, you're going through some real challenges of doing your work and also living your life and trying to be safe. And all of our families are experiencing that as well. And so it may be that some really hard conversations come up that take care of yourself. If you need to take a moment to step back, you can do that. But we hope you then rejoin us. But you know, do take the time that you need to process this. Also, maybe get some water, some tea, and we're going to continue on our work together. But take time as you need it as we go through today.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you all. And what I also say is that this is a really great tool when you're having conversations with your staff about family engagement, or if you're inviting families to inform on something. It can really set this space in a very nice way. So I just want to encourage you all that creating that safe space can lead to solutions as well for families and for your staff. Um, so here we are. We have introduced ourselves, but we thought that you could see us as part of our family. So we are all part of a family unit or a family group in some way. We've all had hands that have helped kind of guide us or raise us along the way. And we're maybe playing that role for others now. So we just wanted to acknowledge that here we we're so glad to be with you at the Alaska School Health and Wellness Institute, and that we're here to learn from you as well as you all learn from each other. So our time together, what we will do primarily for the first hour is we will explore key components of family engagement and discuss some key research on what outcomes we get when we have family partnerships um, that are well built and that when they're systemic. And we also will be exploring the relationships component. How do we build relationships in an Alaska resource for family partnerships? So first hour, really thinking about our mindset and going into our partnerships. And then our second hour, we'll be talking about relationships. And so we'll be where we've done the welcome and agreements. We'll do some introductions to know where you all are each coming from. And then we'll move into that mindset piece, take a break, and then we'll discuss relationships and have some small group conversations. So that's our time together.
Goodness cheese. Okay, so now we get to hear a little bit from you. And this is a smaller group, so I think this will be nice because we can bring your voice in as well. And I know that connectivity is not um, great. This is where it's kind of hard because, you know, if you can, when you speak, maybe you could turn on your video and we can see you even briefly. Maybe you're a shy bunch, but you can pop on and at least put a face to a name. Already, some of you have made that change of putting your name, your district, and your school. Thank you for doing so. I'm glancing at the chat and looking on the screen. I know that we are as north as Wainwright. We have some central areas, Matsu, Anchorage, and then I think Ketchikan, I believe, was another one of those communities. Um, So also, if you could in the chat add your role, including what grade you work with. If you're in the classroom, otherwise, whatever role hat you wear. We may have some counselors here in the room. And then think about who are our families. Use one word to describe your families. So there in the chat, we'll start by putting in the chat and we'll call out to a few of you or, invite a few of you to join. But share your name, district, your role, and then think about your families. Use one word. Thinking about our families, actually, think of one word to describe your families. Who are your families? Who are your families there in Anchorage and Wainwright?
Wow, Melissa, you covered a huge swath. I'd like to maybe see your coverage area on a map. That's quite a lot of communities. Wow.
Thank you. That is a big district. Melissa, I wonder if you've been to how many of those communities you've been to. I like it when you guys probably have gone out to school where people go, "Oh, you're from Alaska." I've been to Alaska. They'll name like one little place there. Like, and do you know if you have a sense of how big our state is?
Wow.
Wonderful. So I see diverse. Thank you, Melissa, as a description as you think of your families. We do have a counselor in the room. I was making a guess, a curriculum coordinator. Wonderful. Good morning, Jana. Nice to have you. And you've been to all of them. Thanks for answering that, Melissa. I'm curious. Amazing. Thinking of our families as amazing. Thanks so much. Complicated. Oh, yes. Indeed. What family isn't? I don't know about your families, but mine keep me grounded and never a dull moment. Goodness sheesh. Would someone like to say good morning to the rest of the group? Would anyone like to turn on their mic and tell us a little bit? I know we put it in the chat, but we'll invite your voice as well. Call in a couple to say good morning. Good morning, Jen from Rainbow. Also diverse. Wonderful. Thank you. Well, maybe you are working up yet. I'm not going to call on anybody, but think of it and also, though, I'm not picking on you, but just inviting your voice into the room.
Good morning. I'll say hi.
Good morning, Lisa. Thank you.
Good morning. To expand on that, I guess I will say that so some places I fly, some places I boat, some places I drive, some places I hike. It's interesting that that's part of my job. And I work with Sukbiak families, a variety of other Alaskan families on the peninsula, old Right Believer Russian villages, and Kenite families.
Thanks so much.
As their school nurse.
Thanks so much. I know there's Anchorage often shares that they have one of the most diverse districts ever, but thinking about, Melissa, your district, maybe doesn't have the same population diversity that Anchorage does, but think about how diverse your district is of, a little more urban and rural and the types of populations and how they interact. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining. So nice to see you. Thanks for, hi, Jana, Leslie, and Danelle. It's nice to see your faces. Thanks for joining. All right. So nice to learn a little bit more about you. We will hear more from you, and you guys will get to interact with each other more too as we do some smaller group discussions. So we're going to cover a real mix of like content and then try to get you guys to do some reflection together. So it's nice to start our day hearing and seeing you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. everyone. And wow, even when we say rural Alaska, there's such a diversity of those of families, and even within one community, families have such a different way of interacting with each other within one family group. But we did want to say the family partnership is this great opportunity. It's a great opportunity for us to make a leap to some of the things that we've been wanting to do. When we think about culturally responsive education, when we think about engaging families with trauma or addressing trauma so that we can link to learning, when we think about place-based, all of it really has to engage families. So the family partnership is this great opportunity that can lead to outcomes in a lot of different areas. And I think that we wanted to bring this forward. We'll talk more about the reasons and all of the things that come with having this deep partnership with families, but it is a great opportunity. And so when we look at the Transforming Schools Trauma Engaged Toolkit and that framework, when you're looking at trauma, when you're addressing trauma, you have to partner with students. And so you have to partner with families and with students. And so there's some chapters there. And so on that next slide, you'll see that family partnerships are at the core of doing that work. And so we could provide self-care for our staff. We could do professional learning. We could change the skill instruction for our students. We could even change our policies. But if we're not engaging with families, it's really hard for us to be trauma informed. But that's still in some ways really looking at what we're lacking. But when we do it really well, when we are able to have this component as part of our work, and it's ongoing. So it's kind of like exercise, right? It's like you're never going to just be in shape. You have to keep maintaining it. But when we do it well and when it's systematic, we see that families build relationships and trust with us. And our school staff feel that same trust as well. They feel heard and listened to, and our families understand better what happens across for the other adults that are in their students' lives. We also see strengths and opportunities for resilience for our families. And we also have meaningful communication. Oftentimes we really struggle with, gosh, I send all the STD stuff to the kids and stuff, or to the families, or I send, I'm not sure what public health kind of initiatives you all have, or the healthy relationship stuff to all of our students. But I never hear from parents, like, how is this engaged with, or how is this conversation happening? And so it could really lead to meaningful communication when we do this well. And it links to learning. And we'll talk more about why it links to learning. But we also have these outcomes that our school staff are really, really interested in and connected to. And that's making sure that our students do well academically. And it does that too. And so it's this really incredible opportunity that can do some of this work. So Lisa.
One thing I mentioned is this is, you can see each of these circles is a chapter in our Transforming Schools, Trauma Engaged Schools framework. And it's really a great useful tool. And you can see that family partnership is a chapter of that. But then also recently, the Association of Alaska School Boards has created a family engagement framework, Stronger Together. And you will find that there's a lot of chapters, where they exist in both. That family partnership, of course, is in the framework and assumed, but here it is, a chapter. And one thing I think I just want to underscore is family engagement, I think, is one of those things that everybody feels like, oh yeah, we got that. But, it actually is, there is a lot of science behind it. There are practices. It is a whole school at the Harvard Grad School of Education, doing family engagement. And think about yourselves and your training and all your extensive training that you've done to become a counselor, to be a teacher in the classroom. And most teachers, I was in a very large room in a conference, over 200, 400 people, teachers from all over the nation. And Dr. Karen Mapp was speaking, and she asked, how many of you, have ever had actual courses on family engagement? How many of you have taken it? And, like nobody raised a hand, maybe outside of her students, right, from the Harvard grad school. And then she said, well, how many of you have, at least been to a conference on family engagement? A trickling of hands. And the point of being like, there are some real systemic practices, there's some tools, there's some frameworks, some real thinkings, just like in here, some different components. And so thank you today for taking some time to think about this in a more deep and meaningful way. But also, like, with that, I think the other key thing is like just knowing meaningful communication. Like, what do we mean by that? And I think where some of our districts kind of get caught up, it's like we say it's important to talk to our families, but if you think about it, it's all primarily one way, right? It's like, oh, yeah, we do this newsletter. Well, that's great, but newsletters usually report mostly on what has already happened, and they're not two-way. They're not a dialogue. Think about yourself in your working relationship, and whether you would feel like it's a good conversation flow if all you ever got was told what to do, but you had no mechanism for giving feedback, for giving input to doing that work. And so that's what we're talking about, that meaningful communication of just like, how do you create that in such a way that you can truly be partners with your students' families in their education, where they could talk to you and give you that feedback and ask questions. And I think that they would really welcome that right now, because they're at home right now with their kids, right, with this remote learning, wondering like, how in the heck do we do this? Like, we can get them into the classroom, but how do I support my kid in math, in science, in history? Or they're not making this connection. Do they have a way to let you know that? How can they find out some more tools? And so that's what we mean by meaningful communication.
Thanks, Lisa. And moving on to this next one. This is our family partnership, kind of building blocks for Stronger Together, which Lisa, you had mentioned earlier. But what we're covering today is these two building blocks, embedding a mindset. So embedding a mindset for partnership and really building those relationships with families so that that communication can be meaningful, so that we really know when something is going on and what strengths there are, and then also what gaps there are. And moving on to kind of our next piece here, really what we know about engaging with families is that it can serve as that connecting point. And so when we leap from what students already know, are you frozen, Tyler? Oh, perfect. Thank you. So I love this artwork too. Just reminds me of my own grandma and just the stories that she would tell. But really, when we do this work well, we know that it can be sticky. It can provide that leaping point from what students and families already know, the strengths that they already have, to where we want to create some learning opportunities. And so it really creates learning that's accessible and relatable, because we are basing it on family and community strengths. And you see our own students respond so differently when their brains are not split and when their full brain is engaged in the classroom. So what we also know, and this is a quote from an Alaskan educator, is that it really allows us to, so as we learn more, I realized that I could truly partner with parents, and that together we could identify and attend to each student's need more quickly and more consistently. And so this is that piece that really makes it so we see how it can really happen. Oftentimes we know as parents what our young kids are maybe struggling with, what their strengths are, maybe what language to use or what tools work when trying to do something. And so for a teacher to have a year or a few months and 30 other kids to figure that out with, you've got a natural partner in that family, and you've got a natural partner in those parents and in those adults that are in the lives of youth. And so then since we know this, and as educators, I think that we know this, but oftentimes only some relationships come easy to us, or only some families that are already engaged do we have this kind of relationship with. But we do know that when we're able to do it well and we're systematic, it can lead to, and there's lots of studies about this, but it's strongly correlated to improved student learning, attendance, and behavior. And all of you all hearing about some of the work that you do, that behavior piece probably really comes into play on a day-to-day basis when you are working with students. And so you could probably get to more of that prevention and get to more of the kinds of programming and things that you want to do versus dealing with behavior on a constant basis if there is that safety there. And Tyler, I think there's something kind of funky about this slide.
Isn't it? I'll talk about this, but just so you know, oh, it's kind of, oh, it's just delayed.
It's
That's
just
fine.
the fancy slide.
Yeah. Okay. Alrighty, good. Hey, so this slide, really just think about it. You know, maybe some of you prefer the visual. Verbally, let me just share that. Thinking about it, they have what they call a dual capacity model, and dual capacity means just, you know, building that knowledge both with the family and the school of how to do family engagement. And so we're talking about that and just creating those conditions, you know, creating some sort of a system in a way in the conditions, in the environment that families feel welcome in your school. You know, what is your, think about it, what is your school's thinking on family engagement? How do they communicate to families that this place is, you are welcome here? Okay, maybe it looks different right now during the pandemic, but generally still there should be ways that parents can connect with you, with the school, and find things out. And with this, I think the most important thing is just to note it that, you know, there are certain families that we know will naturally be engaged. Perhaps their families were engaged. But it can, you know, the thing about the research is it shows that all families, you know, if they participate, their kids will do better. Their attendance will be better. They will do better in the classrooms. They will get that content. And the thing is that it doesn't matter if they are low income. It doesn't matter their race. It doesn't matter the education level of the parents. Just the mere fact of having those parents involved will make a difference. And so how do we do that? And I think about my mother. For myself, I was my mom had 4 daughters. She was a single parent, and yet she would show up at my parent-teacher conferences, which communicated to me that my education mattered. She would check in with me and pay attention to my grades. She would give me that feedback. She would show up at events. And so I knew that it mattered, my education mattered, but there were things she didn't know how to do. I never took a school bus. I walked myself to school. If you've ever been in Alaska Day, I was like 70 pounds walking across the bridge in Taku winds, like gusts up to 60 miles an hour. While a bus went by, she did not know, coming from a rural community, that I could take that bus. There were things she just didn't know, you know, and I think about it, I'm like, how crazy was that as a kid? Like I was like literally hanging on to light posts. I have this memory in the winter of hanging onto this light post because this huge gust came by, so I didn't blow into the street when I could have been taking a bus. There were things that could have made my life easier, not the least of which is a bus to school. But I didn't know about some of those opportunities in high school, and thankfully some teachers like yourselves sought me out and said, you know, did you know about AFN Youth Convention? Did you know that there's this close-up program? You should put your name in for that. But how wonderful would it have been if she felt welcome there, if she could have found out, she could have supported me in new and different ways. And as a parent myself, I was there, and by watching the teachers and listening to what they were saying to the kids when I was helping with the reading, I figured out, I'm like, oh, okay. Not only can I read every, but if I read in this way, or I remember asking questions like of my kids' teachers, I'm like, in the summer, is it better, are audiobooks okay, or should I be reading to them, you know? And she was like, you know what, it all taps into different parts of the brain. The idea is just to keep reading, right? that's the conversations you want to be having with your families. Like, make it such that if they have questions, they can talk to you, and then you can give this feedback like, hey, by the way, my son, he's having a really rough time right now. You know, you might see him act out. You can feel free to call me. But just being able to get that feedback with each other, helping your parents feel comfortable enough that they can talk to you. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about increasing the capacity, their understanding, and making the conditions where they feel welcome. And then helping your understanding of how you can do that systematically.
Thanks, Lisa. And it's both. And it really is the capacity of both. And so when you say, but one teacher is doing it, but if a family hasn't been engaged with in this way, isn't used to being engaged with in this way, like Lisa was sharing, then guess what? It doesn't matter that in fourth grade, they've got a teacher that's really engaging and really asking these questions. If it hasn't been systematic, that family may not connect and may not. So the conditions and the capacities for both staff and families need to be increased. And then and then also their capacities to engage. So thank you, Lisa, for kind of giving that example, as well as if it's not systematic and we haven't done it all along, it can be sometimes really hard to shift back and have that family trust be built. And so those conditions are so important. So we want to take a short break here, and we've shared a lot. We've also tried to include some examples of just how it can play out. But what, after you've heard some of these findings on family engagement, what stands out to you? So I'll put this question here, and feel free to say it out loud.
This is Maria Hernandez. How's it going?
Hi,
From
Maria.
Anchorage. I just, I think one of the things that I work at an alternative school. So our kids already have had a really difficult time engaging with their traditional schools. And so, what you said about if it's not systematic, right, which it hasn't been, right? It just, I don't feel, in Anchorage, at least, I don't know in other communities, but it's definitely not systematic. And so when I get the students and the families, they already hate school, right? Like, and they've used those words, like, I hate school, I hate the system. And so will you be talking about that piece? Because there is that, the trauma that exists with many of our populations, and that trauma between and that broken relationship between schools and families, and which is one of the reasons I'm here, because we struggle with this all the time. And though I feel like we at my school are systematic about trying to do that, by the time they get to us, and I am at high school, it's just really hard. And so I guess that's what I'm thinking about, right? Like what you said is
Mhm.
true. If it's not there, then how do you rebuild or regain that trust and be open about the trauma that's existed, to be able to move forward? I guess that's kind of where
Yes.
I'm at.
That's a really good question. And I think one thing that we'll talk about, but I want to bring it up now because you've brought it up, so it feels important to say, is that one thing that we've recommended is to use an MTSS model and think about your students. So really break up your students. Who are the students that maybe are doing okay? Maybe they're doing okay, but they don't have that connection. So it's maybe doing some things that are universal that can help all students build some connection. And then maybe there's like a second tier of students who are both struggling academically, and maybe there's some other piece there, but that relationship can maybe turn it around. And so maybe there's a group of staff that really work with those students and families. And then there's that last tier, that third tier of really intensive, of saying we've got these 15 students that we really, really, really need to connect to. Who is their person? And having some staff conversations. And this may take some time. You'll say, wow, we're spending a lot of time on 15 students, but those are the students that need it. And then if those other universal things are happening, hopefully those things should catch most of the other students. And so I think really breaking out your students and saying who really needs the extra support and what are some of their needs, And then if you're still not sure about how to break that up, and you say, okay, it's clear that these, you know, this group of students is really struggling, maybe sitting down with some of those students and those families and saying, hey, we're trying to figure out what would help. And we're, rather than just creating something, we really want to hear from you. And so I think really working to break up your student population could be one way that can help you get to more specific solutions for those students. Thank you so much. That's a really great question.
Thank you. I would just say, Maria, that it's the combination of it. I the combination of trauma engaged schools work with family engagement, with culture responsive, like teachers knowing and understanding what is the Alaska Native histories of the peoples of this place, having that context and that knowledge, along with having those trauma engaged practices, but then connecting in real systemic ways with families. So it's like a combination of things that I think you'll be wearing, and we'll be getting to the heart a little bit with some of that relationship piece. I wanted to note, thank you, David, for making a comment in the chat too about, in our schools, some teachers do it, but getting that throughout the school, again, that systematic, that consistency, Maria, you talk about that consistency. If you expand from school to community, right, this whole school district, what if the families you had some ways and mechanisms early on, as their kids enter the school, of being engaged, might there have been something different and consistently since, but so far, by the time you receive them, they have not had that message and consistency, and so you're in the position of having to do some repair, and rebuilding of relationships before you can kind of get to the other parts. And that's just a necessary part. So thank you for that. And so, David, hopefully it can go from the classroom and become something like school-wide and hopefully district-wide. We can dream, and that's what we're working towards. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. I appreciated you bringing up kind of that EMR tool that with some of our students. So EMR is establish, maintain, restore. We use MTSS to try to think about things systematically, and then also to then for you to further break down the relationships that you have. So thinking about the relationships that you have with your families or with your students, which relationships do you need to establish? We just need to build it. We need to put some effort into building that relationship. And then what are the things that I need to do to maintain? In some relationships, and it may not have been you. So I think that's a really good point, Lisa. It may not have been you, but for some relationship, you may need to repair rather than maintain, rather than establish, because there's been some harm that's been done. So thinking about, if you look at, there's different strategies for building a relationship versus repairing a relationship. So I think maybe thinking about that way too. Thanks, Lisa. That was a really great point. Any other pieces that stand out to folks?
Claudia, this is Jonelle from Ketchikan. Just stemming off that question from Maria and your response, thinking of family engagement as part of the MTSS model, that really struck a chord with me because, there are parents that are going to respond to our newsletter, like that would be kind of the tier 1 everything. But then I know that there are those parents that if I want to get a hold of them, like I've got to call, text, email, and then maybe even that tier 3, like do a home visit, like, hey, are you well? Are your kids well? Let's put some eyes on people. But thinking of that as a response instead of a frustration of that's not that parent being disengaged, that's just the norms that family has created. And so what are we going to do to meet those as more of a response than a reaction,
And I think that you've got also an opportunity to shift too when you are preparing for that. And so knowing that, those norms probably became created with some trauma at the center, with some, engagement with the learning system and the educational system. So there are some real experiences that they're basing it off of. And you've got an opportunity, I think, to reshift that and say, maybe if I call, they will answer. Or so I think that you've also got an opportunity to shift that. Thank you. Any other pieces that came up before we go into a short activity?
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that. It helps. This is that peer sharing and learning that we get to do together today. Well, for your questions and your thoughts. Here on the next one is an activity that we pulled out from the family engagement framework. Some of you may have seen it. We've Alaskanized it a bit here with our artist. So we have a bit of an Alaska context. You can see Daniga, the moose out that window there, or in the picture perhaps. But take a look at here, this photo that we have. And what do you see as you look at this colorful photo, or drawing, I'm sorry, this colorful drawing? There's a lot going on. What words would you use to describe this household, this scene or household? And we're a small enough group, you can respond verbally or by chat if you prefer, but we welcome either right now. And I'll try to keep an eye on the chat. I do see busy. Thank you, Maria. Full of life, says Melissa. What else do we see? Kristen, that's real. The world of remote learning. Yes, lots going on. Weekend mode. Bad weather, stuck inside. Whew, aren't we all feeling a little cabin fever by now? End of February. Righty. Looking
And
around.
I'll also share that I straight up said chaotic the first time I looked at this. Stressful. Thanks, Leslie. Yeah, I looked at this and I had a hard time really not describing it as chaotic and maybe a little stressful.
Thank you.
Yeah, my first thoughts were definitely a hot mess, but then I was like, that's what my house looks like when we went to remote learning.
It's all about the camera angle, Janelle.
Yeah. I literally had to take pictures off the walls and put throw pillows away because the kids were just like throwing things everywhere. So I feel for her.
Thank you. Thank you. So Jay Miller added busy, chaotic, put together. So, okay, so we're going to take a moment and just think about this. And maybe some of you have seen this scene before, so we'll just take a pause. So, some of the words we've heard, the world of remote learning right now, busy, lots going on, bad weather, reality, we time to hide, busy and chaotic together, I also see. So we'd like to we're going to go back and take a look at this photo, but with it, we want you to take a look at it. And after you get past looking at the busyness of it all, see what you can find with a positive mindset. Like if you're trying to look for bright, shiny things, like things that are very encouraging or what you would consider positive, what do you see of that in the room? So we're going to go back to that drawing. And you can call it out and add it in the chat, whichever way you want to give us some feedback. Looking at this, taking another look with a positive mindset, what do you see? Right? They have heat, food, and lots of books. Thank you, Maria. I do see books there. There is activity going on. Yeah, I see like the kids playing. What else do we see? Putting on. Someone earlier had mentioned being together. food on the table, some evidence of
Mm.
family pride. Yeah, I guess like from hanging up the kids' art, right? Some supervision, evidence of family participation, plenty of clothes. There's smiles, you know, you can look at it. There's some smile on the kids' faces, so they're enjoying. Actually, I just now saw the baby, my goodness, and all that chaos. my eyes finally went to the center. There is an entire family. I saw the boy playing. But yeah, there's a family there together.
You know, and I think too that you may at first maybe look at this and say, well, you know, there's so much chaos there, but like, what does self-care look like for her? If not just at least sitting down, taking a moment. This could be like Friday, 5 p.m. You've made it through the week. Um, so I definitely also see, you know, some learning activities too that could be linked. So like the fact that families reading, there's games that are being played. Um, I think I see some things on the fridge there too. But I think, you know, this is actually what self-care may look like, or a moment of peace may look like, believe it or not, right?
Thank you.
And yeah, I think the mom is on the phone. And so, um, what's
Thank
going
you.
on here?
So here, I'm going to show this quote, but then speak to it a little bit. If we carry intergenerational trauma, and we do, then we also carry intergenerational wisdom. It's in our genes and in our DNA. Um, Kazuhaga. Um, Here we see some kids, and if you were in the room, you would have, the energy, the pride they had was palatable. You could just feel it. You could not be moved by hearing the powerfulness, like they're singing in unison and with such pride. This is some students in what they call the TCL program in Juneau, Tlingit Culture, Language, and Literacy. And we had invited these students to come, to open one of our conferences with our partners. But what I did last exercise is really reminding us, like, as we do our work in the schools, we may have the school or generally may have the habit of having that deficit thinking, of just thinking of, kind of focusing on, like, of the families who are struggling and seeing the issues and the problems, which are real. Again, that challenges to solutions kind of thinking, that we can't deny that our families and some of our students are really struggling, but also they have some real resiliencies. I think about myself, I am one of those students, and we know this statistic is true in Alaska. Many of our Alaska families statistically have 4 or more ACEs. I come from a family of 7 myself. I had 7, and yet here I am. I feel fairly, healthy and functional, and that wasn't by myself. It was my family, the resiliencies of my family, that unconditional love and support. My mom, having been part of that generation recently of being punished for speaking her language, honestly, just beaten. And yet she found it in her to prioritize my education. She still knew it mattered by showing up, as I've mentioned, coming to these parent-teacher conferences, coming to my events, checking in with me on my schooling, encouraging me and praising me when I did well. And so she valued that and instilled that in me. And for me, then with my kids, I was there. And then by being there, I was able to gain confidence and learn how to support my kids in their education, right? And so that's what we're talking about is, all families, no matter their background and histories, if we are able to engage with them in a meaningful, respectful sort of way and partner with them, they can really help you as you do your work. If those kids are disengaging, they can be a part of that network who helps keep their kids accountable for showing up, for doing that work. And so we hope that you are able to do this work together. But just remember that when you see them, to not get caught up in that deficit model thinking. Just remind yourself that there are some real strengths here in the family that we hope to tap into.
Thanks, Lisa. And, you know, I won't go too much into this, but the research, and we've mentioned research many times so far, but our experiences really match that. And we really wanted to talk about some of our experiences first before getting here and kind of having all these statistics. But as Lisa mentioned, regardless of income and educational background, it can be an incredible benefit to have family engaged in that student's learning outside of all of that, right? And so if we shift our mindset, and it can be something as simple as looking at that phone, is that mom being neglectful being on the phone, or is she getting some support after a long day, or who knows what's going on there? If we knew her, we might understand. But we know that regardless of what's going on for that family, it's an incredible benefit. We know that most families know a lot about children's skills, interests, things that they already are coming in with. However, and you saw that with the conversation that we talked about capacities and conditions, most families do not feel confident and clear in how to help, how to link to education. We also face that issue of having school staff that also don't know how to quite do that. How do we link? How do we build up that confidence? What's appropriate? Is it appropriate for me to ask for help with this? What language do I use? That can be really hard. And fewer than 10% of school staff have received specific training for how to do this. Fewer than 25% have attended some kind of training. And we know that relationships between school staff and families are a determinant of family participation. So if we build those relationships, some of these barriers can be overcome and they become strengths. We can start to look at those things that families are showing up with and building off of those. So we have just a short reflection here for you. And we'll just take 5 minutes. But going back to our practices that we've used, what are some common classroom practices or school practices that you have found have foundation in deficit thinking? And reflecting on your own education and training, when do you see deficit thinking show up? And this is hard, but I think facing something and reflecting on it can help us. So we'll take 5 minutes. Feel free to turn off your camera and reflect on these 2 questions.
one more minute for reflection, and we'll come on back.
Okay, thanks everyone. So feel free to wind down your thoughts. So we'll do just a little bit of group share out today. What are some of those things that you've seen? And I will put the questions in the chat just so we see them there as well as we're on this other slide. But when have you seen deficit thinking show up? And when have you seen it show up maybe in our own training as educators? So feel free to share on either question. What came up for you? Go for it, Maria. I see you there.
I was waiting to see if anybody else wanted to go first. For me, it was more of I think when people get frustrated, right? Have different expectations of our community, our students, and our families. And I think when we don't understand, it is easy to point fingers, and it's easy for us to think of like, oh, there's all this going wrong and this is why. And so I think when people get frustrated or unable to problem solve is when I think you get that thinking of like, oh, it's because this is missing, or it's because these families are, not engaged because, and so I think that frustration can lead to looking at a situation in more of a deficit than a positive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We tend to focus in on all the things that are going wrong,
Right.
And we're missing the things that are going well, or the strengths that we could build off of.
And I think that mainly happens, I think, from a personal level, right? We tend to assume that people are going to act like we would act in situations, and when they don't, then it's easier for us to be like, oh well, of course this is what you're supposed to do, and you didn't do it that way, and that can lead you down a wrong path. But
And it kind of assumes like a particular worldview, maybe that
right.
You would respond to this how I think that you would respond to this in a particular world experience. When somebody sees a letter from school, oh gosh, it's chock full of opportunities there. How could they not see that? Well, it also maybe for them, they are interpreting as a chock full of lots of things that scare them or that intimidate them. Thanks so much, Maria. How about for you, Janelle? Sorry about that. I hope I didn't mispronounce your name.
No, you nailed it. It's hard for me to articulate. It's things that I see that when I see them or hear people express them, it's like, oh, why are we stuck in that rut? Yeah, so it's the words are not coming to me this morning. But like when I try and work with teachers to have them reach out, or they'll ask me about a kid or a family, like, well, you already know them, so reach out. It's like, well, I do, because I've established that relationship and I love any opportunity to talk to them. But what if they have more people in the school that they could connect with as well? Let me give you some insight and some tips on how to interpret what they're saying, because you might find them aggressive, but I just see them as like a parent that really wants the best for their kid, and that's how they express themselves. So what if you also join the team to do that instead of just like, well, you know them, so you do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. So it's interesting that sometimes like you built that relationship and you did particular things to do that, and then that led to you being able to work better together. But that shortcut isn't available to everyone. And how easy is it for you to translate something that a different teacher really wants from them? It's kind of hard and it's kind of confusing, and it may not even fit with the nature of the relationship that you have with them. You don't bring things out of surprise to somebody you have a relationship with.
Yeah, and it puts me as the middleman oftentimes, where it's like, this is not actually an issue I have with your kid or what I need support with you in, because you and I are doing what we need to do. Um, so but that's is something I run into a lot, and there just hasn't been a lot of structure, maybe top down, of saying that, teachers, you need to be that first line of contact. Don't just go to someone who has that established relationship, because really we need to be widening our net.
I really love that. It makes me think of a session I joined this summer about making connections with the difficult family, right? That parent, and the point that this person made, and she herself had a special needs student, and she worked in the schools, but she was talking about how when she went into this one classroom, she was getting warnings from multiple teachers, like, oh, you have that difficult parent, right? They were all like setting her up, like, oh, well, be prepared, because this, and with the experience of this family members, like they kept not feeling supported, not feeling heard. And so she set it up differently, in such that at the beginning of the year, she invited this parent to come in. She, instead of sitting across from the desk, she was intentionally working on a project and asked them to come help her, like she was putting up a board. She offered them some water, sat down, and she said to this parent, so tell me about your son. What would you like me to know about your son? And that's how she started the conversation, and rather than just assuming that it's going to be a fight, and and it's going to be antagonistic, just trying to see her as that parent, as a partner. And by the end of the year, became one of the biggest allies for the school. So appreciated that relationship, and hopefully each teacher can do that. And so unwillingly, maybe the other teachers are trying to help give this person a heads up that this is going to be a challenge, but maybe shifting that a little bit about what can we do together to change that relationship so that it isn't hopefully adversarial or as challenging. Maybe what can we do to work together? Melissa, I saw you turn on to join. Did you have something you'd like to share?
Yeah. So in my role, becoming part of a team or building a team in each of my sites, as a person who is itinerant, I find that I'm being part of the team as opposed to an outsider, just my role as not being part of that school's community in the eyes of parents and the staff negates from them the capacity to use these resources from health services, and and then that's a whole deficit for that community. But also, if I don't take those extra steps to change the way that communication is going with sometimes parents, sometimes students, sometimes staff, then they just feel more like, here again, I am not receiving these resources that should be part of our school environment. But also how the whole child safely and respectfully and privately communicating to staff and parents and students how health is such a large component to them, their capacity to be educated and to grow as students, as thinkers. You're crossing into some privacy all the time, and I see deficit thinking like every day in terms of how to bridge that. And maybe we can't agree, but it shouldn't stop the conversation. And it's not even about agreement per se. It's just about roles and
Mhm.
perspective.
Thanks, Melissa. And I've also seen, and I want to add this, I feel like it's in line with what you're saying, but also in adding to it, what I've seen too sometimes is that we've been encouraged to, in some ways, teach our way out of things. Kids can't deal with whatever, we make a lesson. Hopefully, they'll learn it. We can't do this in this area here, we'll make a lesson with it. But it sounds like for you, relationships or other kinds of trust building is actually a better avenue rather than like creating a tool or and then having that team really be what informs you and helps to link you. Because we also, and we'll talk after we take a short break, we'll talk about relationships, but we don't want a relationship or the lack of a relationship to be the avenue or to be the factor that makes somebody engage or not engage. If that's the gate, that's a very, very hard gate to get through as a family or as a student. And you have to do it every time, or with new people all the time. And so really trying to make sure that we don't have that relationship be the gate, but that those relationships are open for our students because they lead to these good outcomes. So I wanted to open it up at this point to see if there's anyone else that wanted to share before we go into a short break.
From the North Slope, do you have anything? How about Matsu? We still see you. We hope you're with us and thinking. Maybe you're saving it for the relationships conversation.
Well, this is David up at Wainwright. I'm multitasking. I'm trying to get a family some help right now. And before the COVID, at times it was frustrating. And right now, it's really frustrating. I've been on the hold for 30 minutes and still no one's talked to me yet. So that's a challenge too now with all that's going on to try to go through all even more hoops to get family some help. So that's where I'm at. I'm multitasking. I'm listening, but I've been on hold for 30 minutes.
All right. Well, maybe the things, the planets will align, and they'll come online as we're at this break. We're rooting for you, David.
And we'll have
Thanks
some
for checking
questions for them. No, we won't. I'm teasing.
in. All right. Well, thank you. We, as Claudia mentioned, we will get to have some more conversations. We'll have some moving into now the relationships, which we know are going to be so key. So we're going to give you here are we still doing a 10-minute break?
Let's do a 5-minute break.
5?
5 minutes?
Say 5, Ken. Okay.
5, I think.
Okay. So we'll start the timer for 5 or for 10 and come back when it says 5. So give yourself time to stretch, run to the restroom, refill your water, and we'll see you back here in 5. There we go.
Thanks all.
Tyler
Thanks,
fixed it for
Tyler.
us. Thank you so much.
about 30 seconds and we'll come on back together. All right. 5 minutes wraps up. Feel free to turn your cameras back on or not if you prefer to leave it off.
All right, welcome back. Hopefully you got to stretch a bit, and I squeezed in a really quick call, and here I am. I'm present and I am getting engaged again. Nice to see you. Thank you. So we're shifting now from some of the different thinkings, so the basic frameworks of shifting our mindsets of how we think about family engagement. But you know, one thing we wanted to do, if we can get that next slide up, is just thinking about our families. You know, we kind of have alluded to this a little bit, but we had picked up a few of these things. Oh, but they're still kind of popping up, but just acknowledging that what our families are engaging, and our families are us, and they are the people we are working with. So I'm thinking about that, thinking about how parenting can be a challenge in any day, but certainly now just continuing to remember the context of this pandemic. But right now, I'm just knowing that a vast majority of our families are raising children who've experienced trauma and mental health, and so we just want to think about mental health needs that are healthy families too. You know, there are families who have all the resources who are also dealing with some mental health issues, as well as families who have intergenerational trauma. So just recognizing that it can be really stressful for them as they are navigating our schools and how to get their kids schools. You know, how do you parent, you know, how are our parents doing with the students who have IEPs? Good parenting skills don't usually work when a child has those different mental health issues. You know, we just know that it can be different. And so how can we help them? You know, how do they help them as they are navigating depression and anxiety and being triggered by this pandemic, which we know is impacting our kids? So thinking about that, and so what resources do we need? How can we help them with this? So one thing we know in this state, as great as it is in size, as great it is in beauty and connection, we also know it is lacking in just the access to resources for trauma. So what can we do? At the very least, be aware of that and remind ourselves of that. When we're talking, if we have a really challenging conversation, maybe it's not about us, but about them and the life they're living at the moment. And so maybe even just listening, maybe a little more patiently and kindly, you know, and that, you know, these may be manifesting themselves as behavior problems. But, you know, just going to the default of going into the punitive disciplinary type strategies may not be what may help this student the most. So what other options, what other tools do we have in our toolbox besides discipline? Do we have some restorative practices that we might be able to pull on and use? And then this one, the last one in particular, is one that I have my mind on as a student who was not a behavior issue student, but I was probably right on that edge when I was going through high school, where I could have dropped out. I could have been one of those kids who dropped through the cracks because I was very quiet. So for me and for other students, it could look like disengagement, right? Of just either not showing up or just not participating, not talking, not interacting. And so, that is another coping mechanism for some of your kids, as their lids are flipping, they're feeling stressed out. Um, they may be just unable to cope right now. And part of their way might be just go like, I'm here physically in the class, but I'm not really paying attention and how much learning is going on at that moment. So just thinking about how we can start using trust and relationships to get to that and help remedy that.
So, and thanks, Lisa, bringing it back to trauma, bringing it back to, for looking, and we'll get to the MTSS model a little bit below, but bringing it back to that of that top triangle, what are those families experiencing? And if we're assuming everything is the same for them, including what does behavior look like with trauma, what does behavior look like, just socially, if we don't account for trauma, we may be missing their life experiences. So one solution, and Lisa, you really touched on it there as well, to build trust is to have relationships as a foundation. So we know that when students are triggered or when family is triggered and that trauma response comes in, relationships can be that thing that can really help us. And so when we look at any of these big areas of work and trauma engaged schools, partnering with families, culturally responsive education, student performance, well-being, positive school climate, relationships are at the center. And so if we focus in on those relationships, we are saying that can be a startup strategy for that top tier that really needs some additional supports. And thank you, Lisa, for getting us to think a little bit about what is that reality for a family that is in that top tier and is experiencing quite a bit of trauma. So looking at that MTSS model to account for family needs. And so you all talked a lot about some opportunities that are afforded to all families. And there's a standard way that we assume somebody's receiving the information. We know we're successful when we have so many people participate or engage with this. For that second tier, we may need to do a little bit more, like that phone call to get them to show up, or that text, or just when should we schedule this so it makes sense with your schedule. You don't have your typical schedule, so there may be some additional supports that you do to boost a few families to kind of get them over the hump and maybe get them more engaged. And then there's some special efforts that you would do for a few families, for those families that are really experiencing those traumatic situations or have a history of trauma, or whose students are struggling socially or behaviorally. And the reason why we recommend this and why we say great relationship is a great tool, but we also want to say that this should be done, relationship building should be done in an equitable way. If this is the gate through which students can reach success or families can get engaged, and those relationships are only available to some families, and we can't always even tell maybe which families. Oh, I get along really well with maybe my Eastern European families that I work with because we've got some things we can relate to. But then I'm struggling with this other group of families. If I'm the gate and that relationship is not equally accessible, then that's not equitable. So we know students do so much better when those relationships are available to all of them. And you may not need to be the relationship for every student, but every student needs relationships to feel cared for and connected. So moving into this next conversation, we'll be doing some group thinking in our small groups together, but we are making some assumptions about you moving into this. And so what we're assuming and what we know is that you value your relationship with your students already, that you spend time cultivating this and really thinking about this, and that you already know how to do some best practices for that. Although I think that bullet doesn't really make sense, but that's what I meant that bullet to say. You have some best practices that you use on a daily basis. We're also assuming that you want to get better at catching those relationships that are a little bit harder, that you want to do it more intentionally and you want to do it with an equity lens. And we also are assuming that it would help if you had time to plan and reflect. We often don't get this time together. That if you had structures to talk with your colleagues about it, and if you had concrete ways of applying an equity lens to your relationships. So these are our assumptions about you, that you already know a whole lot, that there's some areas you want to improve, and that this space should hopefully help. and conversations together. So moving into this next piece, we want you to reflect on.
So we're gonna do a quick 2-minute reflection, but then we are also going to go into groups. So kind of think this as a warm up. We're giving you some time to do some individual reflection before you go into the group. And so here, you can turn off the camera if you'd like, that helps, but we'd like you to take a few moments just for yourself and sit with these questions. What student and family connections come easily to you? Think about right now. Well, who are those families that you're already connected to, talking to? Who are these ones that you connect with easily? And then think about who are the students and families that you find more of a challenge to connect with? Who aren't you hearing from during this pandemic? Who have you really had a hard time, like even finding their number, connecting with, whatever? What role do you think trauma played? And then think about what role do you think trauma plays with that? So just take a couple minutes to think to yourself of who are you connecting with and who are you having a harder time connecting with? And what role do you think trauma might play with that? We'll come back in a minute and a half, 2 minutes. Okay, thank you. So now that you've given some thought to this, we're going to give you guys an opportunity to interact with each other. I think maybe 2 groups of 4. How does that sound, Claudia?
I think
Thank
that
you,
sounds
Tyler.
good.
Tyler, our Wonder Tech Guru. Thank you so much. So as we go into our breakout groups, already you've given some pre-thinking to about, the families and the students that you are easily connected with and those that are more challenging. As you go into your breakout groups, we'll give you 15 minutes. It sounds like a lot, but 15 minutes will go quickly, but we want to give you some time together to think about how are you creating space to get to know those, the students and the families who are struggling. How are you creating that space? The other question we would like you guys to discuss together is what strategies could help you connect and reach those families that you're trying to connect with.
I think we're on that next slide, Tyler.
Yeah. So this is a question. We'll leave it up for you guys as you go into breakout. I think that you will still be able to see it, and we'll also drop it in the chat so that way you can see it. But just thinking about how are you creating that space to get to know your struggling families, and what strategies can you use to connect with them. So Janelle, you'd mentioned that you are known in your building to being able to connect with them. Maybe you can share with some of the others in your group, but together you guys will be in 2 groups. 2 smaller groups, and we'll give you 15 minutes, and then we'll come back and share out together. Does anyone have any questions? Tyler will be sending you breakouts. Sometimes you have to do the, I don't know, will they automatically go or do they have to accept?
So I've got the breakout rooms ready. I'll open those up and you should be whisked away to your room and they will automatically close out after 15 minutes.
We'll try to give you like
y'all there
maybe
now.
1 minute, you'll see a countdown and you'll know that then you'll get whisked back to this big group in 15 minutes. So we hope you have some good discussions on finding that space and thinking about strategies.
All right, I will open those up now and see you in 15 minutes.
Thanks, Tyler. Hello.
Hello. Looks like Lisa joined in with hers.
Maybe I'll do the same. I
will
wasn't
pause.
sure. David, did you have a hard time joining? Oh, David may still be on hold.
Thank you so much. So now we get to do some sharing back. It was a really good discussion. It's so quick, isn't it? That 15 minutes. But from somebody in the group, from the group one that I was in, Maria, Melissa, Leslie, and David were in our group. Would someone like to share out some of the key points that you heard? And someone can add in.
You took notes, right? You did really good with the notes.
Did summarize like back to you. It reminded you the second question. But who are you connecting with? Starting with who did you guys find? And who did you find was harder? And then you guys quickly got to a couple of strategies, which I thought were. This is a unique group because in this group we had quite a lot kind of administrator kind of level. You know, not necessarily in the classroom, but helping the districts overall and how they are communicating and working with families. So what you could see, Melissa or Maria or Leslie, David, who were you connecting with and who was harder?
So I'll just say that the families and staff who, for whom district policies around pandemic mitigations have been the easiest to communicate with. Those who feel differently have been the hardest to communicate with. And the strategies have been to take a team approach to communication that's well documented and communicated amongst the team, and diversifying the varieties of ways that we are attempting those communications.
I thought it was a good note to say that it was easier to connect with families that were not in trauma, and it was harder for us to connect with families that are currently experiencing or have experienced trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I think you guys had even mentioned, you know, the extra interesting layer of a religious leader, you know, one of your communities, you know, where they tend to work with and through that, and that adds a different layer of complexity. And then some of the strategies that you guys are currently using more, you guys were instead of one-on-one, not specifically, but some of the practices that you have instituted in your district or across your school that for communication and building that network. What are some of the things that you guys shared there? Would like to share on that?
I shared at our group that for me as an AP at an alternative high school, we've done more of a systematic approach to be intent, like have intent to building relationships with our students and families. And so we started a mentorship program where we connect each student to one staff member, a teacher, and that main staff member is the main point of contact for families as well. Because in this age of COVID, parents are receiving like a million different messages from different places. And so we wanted it to narrow it down so that we can start building those relationships. And so far, that's been working really well for us.
David had mentioned a different type of mentorship. David, I don't know if you wanted to share that briefly. and acknowledging that sometimes it works and sometimes it didn't, but still it was yet another option. David, did you want to share that?
Oh, just that I do mentor groups too, but I originally, like my mentor groups had students that I thought would be good mentors. And it turned out that that wasn't true, that the traumatized kids didn't relate to those kids. So sometimes I have a student that has gone through trauma and has been successful, I think, that have them relate with each other. Again, I see adult and student, but I also think a traumatized kid needs friends. I have students that have no friends.
Makes sense. Thank you. I think it's a matter of like without getting that trusted adult, but also just getting them connected and feeling supported in whichever way, through the trusted adult and maybe a peer. So it was a good discussion, and I think just recognizing that it seems like in their roles, Melissa, you had mentioned some different things that you're trying to bring in to the the district overall. Of how they are connecting. Because you're really working through them, so it's really providing resources and tools to them to do that. Thank you, Maria. Thanks for joining us.
All right, so I know folks have to run, and I just, does anybody want to share from our group, or I can quickly kind of summarize what we talked about? And then we've got a couple of resources that we wanted to share out with you all.
Why don't you quickly summarize?
Please, thank you.
Please.
Okay, I can do that. So we talked a lot about how sometimes that top tier of students, there are some additional services that they can access. And so sometimes we actually don't necessarily struggle with reaching those because there's some services that once we know that there's an issue, we can provide to them. But sometimes those students that are struggling just enough, they're just getting by, they may not get noticed, either by the kind of universal measures, or those families may not get noticed or engaged with those universal measures, or with the specific services that maybe a family could receive if they're experiencing some particular very specific hardships, like financial hardship, free lunch, or those kinds of things. So we talked a lot about how that could be the case. We also talked a lot about how sometimes families do feel that need to come in and be very defensive of their student. And if they're not feeling like we can all figure things out as a team, that's a hard place to go from. We did talk about how some issues, once we know what a family is experiencing, really working with some outside supports. So we commit to helping the student and the family, but we may not be able to give domestic violence training or support services for that. But how do we link for that? How do we link to some services for that student so that they are able to feel safe going home, or that they're able to know that adults care for them and they feel supported? So those are some of the things that we talked about, and how really you as an individual may not have all the answers, but if you are approaching it systematically as a team, and if you're also engaging some external supports and services for those things you cannot address, then that might also be another approach. So those are some of the things we talked about. And then, sorry to do this so quickly, but we did want to mention that a lot of the information and content that we provided came from the Stronger Together framework. This is available for free for download on AASB's website. If you want a physical copy, please let us know. There's also a book study, so I put in a form that you can fill out if you're interested in the book study, or if you just want to know more about this framework. And then next week on Wednesday, we have another opportunity to explore some systematic ways of establishing and maintaining and restoring those relationships and linking to learning. So that's what's coming next. Thank you all so much for hanging in there with us. I really appreciated the conversation, and I'm walking away with some good notes for myself. So Ganashish Hawa, thank you.
Thank you. I wish you the best, thinking about our families. I can't help but worry, and I know you guys must care too. And so thank you for all the work that you do in helping your district connect with those families. They certainly, even the ones who are thriving can really use some support and connection. And And then families who are going through trauma, absolutely, will need that. So thank you for being an advocate for them and for helping the district connect. Maybe we'll see some of you next week. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.